Hello friends, welcome back. We continue with our pursuit of integrating ideas from allopathy into homeopathy. Homeopathy, as you will soon discover, is actually a natural extension of allopathy. It appears to be different because some ideas seem to be contrary, or they have been told to us in such a way. But by the end of this course, you will realize that this is one field of therapeutic art which you can easily combine and integrate into your current practice. We have seen earlier that there are many areas where integration can happen. In this lesson, we shall be looking at two of these strings. We will be looking at paradoxical action and idiosyncratic reactions, both of which we have seen in two earlier lessons. So continuing the thread from there, let us see what we can learn from that. As a quick reminder, a paradoxical effect of a drug is an effect which is opposite to the effect which would normally be expected from the drug. For example, a rebound congestion which often occurs by continued use of a decongestant. Idiosyncratic action or idiosyncratic drug reactions, abbreviated as IDRs, are those abnormal reactions to any chemical that is peculiar to a given individual. In other words, not everyone who takes a certain medicine exhibits or shows all the side effects or adverse effects. Certain individuals show certain adverse effects. That marks them out as being unique in relationship to that drug, and this is one idea upon which we'll dwell upon and expand in our knowledge of homeopathy and put it into clinical practice to our advantage. We must remember one thing, that idiosyncratic reaction is actually reactivity for a peculiar or a given individual. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that every drug or medicinal substance has a primary action followed by a secondary action. Homeopathy harnesses this property to heal rather than harm. The secondary effects of any drug or substance can be likened to the ripples that we see on the water after the first splash. Another way of understanding it is that it is the homeostatic response of the body to come back to its normal original state of stability. It is something like the stability of a ship. If a gust of wind rocks the ship, it tends to come back on even keel. Let us examine a few primary and secondary actions. I'm not going into the detail of how they occur or the mechanism at the molecular or the cellular level or at the physiological level. This is just an observation all of us know. Take for example coffee. Coffee primarily makes a person more alert and lively. All of us know that. But continued and long usage of that or an excess of that produces quite the opposite effect. A shot of coffee from the espresso machine makes us livelier, but large doses of coffee or taking it too frequently makes us tired. One way to explain that is that being a diuretic, it makes a person dehydrated, and that could be the cause of tiredness. But as I said a little while ago, we are not going into the physiological reasons behind that. We are just observing the primary and the secondary actions, which are just a natural response of coffee. Take the example of opium. We don't use that as a medicinal substance today. There are other substitutes for that. However, what is known from medical literature is that opium would normally be given for people with insomnia. So opium would be able to give a stupefying sleep. However, continued use of that produces insomnia. In fact, that is so for any addictive substance. But once again, we are not going into the details of the reason why. We are just looking at the empirical and observational notings made by various practitioners. Similarly, opium actually can cause diarrhea, and as a secondary effect, it can cause constipation. These are just a few examples, but we will be using these two substances, coffee and opium, in the form of homeopathic remedies as part of our practice. We can summarize what we just discussed in the last few slides in the words of Dr. Hahnemann. He observed that the curative power of medicine exists only because it can produce symptoms in the healthy and remove them from the sick. In other words, in the examples that we saw, supposing a person is tired, he would like to have coffee, which makes him lively. But for a hyper excited state, a homeopathic remedy produced by a certain process will be able to do just the opposite. An obstinate constipation, which is caused by opium in the raw form, can be overcome by preparing a homeopathic remedy from opium after following a certain process. Once again, I'll repeat, the curative powers of medicines exist only because they can produce the symptoms in the healthy person and remove them from the sick. Another observation was that the curative powers depend upon the symptoms that they produce, being similar to the symptoms of the disease but stronger. In other words, only if a substance can produce those symptoms will it be able to overcome those symptoms in a sick person. This is just a repetition or a rewording of what has been said in the circle on the left hand side. Homeopathy employs high dilution dynamized drug. So when I'm talking about a remedy called coffea, and normally we use the Latin names for that, instead of coffee we call it coffea, that has to go through a certain process which is known as dilution and dynamization. And we use very highly diluted and dynamized drugs. High dilutions of histamine, for example, it has been found in the laboratory and in clinical studies to have significantly inhibited immunoglobulin E, the IgE, induced degranulation of basophils. You can see the study in the reference which I have noted in the next slide. Likewise, high dilutions of thyroxine delayed the metamorphosis and growth in tadpoles in a series of 4 studies. So not only have homeopathic medicines had effect on human beings as noted in the first sentence, they have also been observed in animal studies. As a matter of fact, they have also been seen in plant studies, as you can see that it was demonstrated that it had an influence on cell lines in plants and animals too. Those of you who wish to pursue this further can refer to these documents. So far we have seen that the way homeopathic drugs or remedies are prepared and the way they are employed is quite the opposite of what we normally do in our practice. The effect of dynamized drugs is opposite to the dose-dependent biochemical model. When we learn pharmacology, we look at the effects it has at its absorption at the cell wall level and what are the processes that they change. That is a biochemical model, and that is dependent upon the dose, the frequency, as well as the substance matter in terms of weight or grams. So dynamized drugs are quite the opposite. Such substances can awaken responses in biological systems. But in homeopathy, we apply the principle of therapeutic similitude. This allows us individualized treatment because, as we learned earlier, the IDRs or the idiosyncratic drug reactions are very specific to certain people. What makes them specific is something that we learn how to study in homeopathy. What makes that person more susceptible to that particular drug reaction is something that we'll study in the future. The whole aim of homeopathy is to find one single simple remedy at one time. We do not use polypharmacy as has been discussed earlier. The whole idea is to find the peculiarity, the individuality, the uniqueness of the person who is exhibiting those symptoms. And as the founder of homeopathy, Dr. Hahnemann, liked to say, why employ complex means when simple means suffice? That brings us to the end of this lesson. Thank you for your attention. And just as a quick recap, you will realize that the foundation of homeopathy is based on the fact that every drug or substance produces a primary effect followed by a secondary effect. The secondary effect is quite the opposite of the primary effect. This is demonstrated amply with paradoxical and the idiosyncratic reactions of drugs on individuals. However, homeopathy uses the unique methodology of producing dynamic drugs produced by a certain process, defined process, which we shall discuss later, and that allows us to use the secondary reaction for our primary healing purposes. So once again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please post them on the forum. And until we meet in the next lesson, bye-bye.